This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Engles. Shop online with Engles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to this week's Engles on the Beat, back from the NFL Combine, where myself and Kaylee Manziel and D. Orlando Ledbetter of the AJC had it covered. Talked to all those Georgia players, talked to a lot of SEC stars, talked to some Florida State players, and got to the bottom of a lot of cool stories. Well, first, let's start out with the Combine reactions. I think Ladd McConkey, Amarius Mims, I think these are two guys that made themselves a lot of money. Amarius Mims with an incredible shuttle time. I think it was the fastest shuttle time by a lineman in over a decade. Ladd McConkey runs a 4.39 40, looks really good in drill work, explosive in his jumps, may have worked his way into the end of the first round. A lot of teams with a lot of interest in Ladd McConkey. Kamari Lassiter didn't run the 40, but he ran a 3-cone that was the fastest there and kind of showed his hips and showed his hands in the drill work. Thought he did well. He's kind of a fringe first-round guy. I'd call that a push. I don't think he blew anybody away, but I don't think he sunk either, and there's something to be said for that because a lot of guys go in there with a lot of hype, and when they don't live up to it, I do think stock can suffer. And I think you got to be careful of what drills you do and even whether or not you work out. And Brock Bowers, I thought, made a fantastic decision not to work out at the Combine. Brock Bowers is the number one tight end, head and shoulders above everyone else. When you weigh the risk versus the reward, I think there was a lot more to be potentially lost than won. I mean, so what if Brock Bowers ran a 4.40 40? Would that surprise you? Would it move you up? Would it move him up in your eyes? Probably not. But if he had a slow run, 4.49, 4.51, maybe he's not feeling good, maybe he pulls a muscle, well, that casts some doubt. And so I think Bowers made the right decision. I wonder if he'll run at Pro Day. I could see him doing it. Listen, the guy wants to compete. He wants to take part in these drills. I just think when you're in that combine environment and there's all those bright lights and all those commentators and all they're there to do is talk. And if things are a little bit off and people start talking about it, perception becomes reality. I just think it's a very boomer bust environment. Really happy for Javon Bullard and Tyke Smith. These guys ran 4.46, 4.47. That was 1/10 of a second faster than I expected either one of them to run. And I think these guys made some money too. I think Javon is solidly in the second day of the draft as a second or third round pick. Tyke now in that discussion, maybe third, fourth round. Tyke Smith led the team in tackles and interceptions. Maybe the most underrated and underappreciated guy on defense when you look at the production. You know, he got off to a slow start after transferring in for West Virginia, had a series of injuries. But this last season, Tyke Smith really put it together. I thought had a dynamite year. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint did not run the 40. Maybe should have. It was a fast turf there. But Marcus had a 35-inch vertical jump. His long jump was okay. Showed his hands. I'm sure he interviewed well. This is another guy that's going to get picked, be that fourth, fifth receiver, play special teams, and really battle to make the 53-man roster. And again, these are all just my opinions, right? In the second segment here, in just a little bit, I'm going to bring on a good friend of mine named Nick Baumgardner. I used to work with Nick at MLive back in the day. Nick covered the Michigan Wolverines. He now writes for The Athletic, covers the NFL, and really does a lot of work on the NFL draft. So we'll have an expert athletic opinion on the NFL draft here in just a little bit on tonight's show. And then the final segment, the hot and cold winners and losers style segment, we'll go over again who the big winners were from Georgia and maybe some of the guys that maybe didn't quite fare as well as they would have liked. So the Combine take overall, I think it was great for Georgia. Maybe Georgia wasn't the most prominent team there. We know there were 18 guys from Michigan, whether there should have been or not. There are probably some guys there that you kind of go, but a lot of bodies there for Michigan. I think if Georgia had a quarterback there, they would have talked about a lot more. Alas, Carson Beck is back for another year. Carson could have been there. Carson probably would have been drafted late first, early second, in my opinion. Instead, he comes back with a lucrative NIL deal. Of course, you've seen the picture of him with the Lamborghini. It was kind of funny, though. I did a story on DawgNation.com where I was getting some information from Tate Ratledge, right? He does this podcast called Real Talk. Does a nice job with it. And Tate was just cracking on Carson Beck. It was hilarious. I recommend you take a look at that story, and you kind of get an idea how the Georgia locker room stays in check. When you got guys like Tate Ratledge in there, I don't think anybody's head's going to get too big on the offensive side of the ball. And he sat down with Trevor Etienne, and Etienne was a really interesting interview. Another DawgNation story over the weekend. Etienne talking about adjusting from Florida to Georgia and the locker room, and just the continuity in the Georgia locker room, how they're not that close at Florida. And he talked about his decision to come and play at Georgia, where he's got a chance to be the starter. It doesn't really matter. Him and Rod Robinson are going to split the backfield, I think, coming out. Robinson, a 240-pound back. This is kind of a thunder lightning deal, I think, right? Etienne is a true home run hitter. Had to run over 80 yards as a freshman, over 60 yards last year. Georgia has been missing that home run hitter in the backfield. I think this is the most complete back that Georgia's had since DeAndre Swift. I have very, very, very high expectations for Trevor Etienne. He's a game changer, and he gives Georgia something they need, because I'm still not convinced about the wideout position. But Etienne really good in that interview, talking about the chemistry, talking about why be a number 2 back on a losing team when you could be a potential starter on a national championship team. And it's just true. Napier had him pigeonholed behind another back. I think Etienne was clearly better than. I mean, Etienne goes for 172 on Tennessee, helps Florida with the big win in Swamp. I was there that night, looked outstanding, doesn't start the next game. They got issues in Gainesville, folks. I got to tell you, they got issues. So that was a good interview with Etienne, good story. Ratledge did a nice job interviewing him. I had a lot of fun reading that. So the off season, there's been some moves, obviously, on the Georgia staff. You saw Del McGee become the new head coach at Georgia State. You saw BMAC go to the NFL. I mean, listen, these are really good coaches, but at the same time, Kirby Smart is going to hire guys that are extremely efficient at their position. And one of the things I noted about the running back position, there's been 18 slotted first and second team running backs over the last 4 seasons in the SEC. Okay. 18 spots on first team or second team all SEC over the last 4 seasons. Georgia had none of them. Nobody from Georgia earned first team or second team all SEC running back in the last 4 years. 18 slots, folks. So take what you want from that. I know they share carries. They share carries everywhere. All right. I don't think Georgia's done as good a job as they could have. And I do think some of it's injury related, but at the same time, I think that's an area where Georgia can get better. And I think having a former running back coaching the position, I think, is also important. Because I think running backs have a certain mentality about them. And if you haven't carried the ball, you wouldn't understand it, right? Even a guy like me that carried the ball in high school, I understand this. I get it. But I do think Coach Crawford, I really like this hire. Dejon Edwards tells us this guy is serious. Says this guy's serious. Says you're not going to get anything by him. If you get a chance to watch the Dejon Edwards video, Dejon Edwards is a pretty serious guy himself. So if Dejon says this guy's serious, that's pretty serious on the serious scale. And the way he said it was like, this coach is not somebody you want to mess with. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun for Georgia. And then the receiver coaching position with James Coley coming back. Think about this stat, and this is telling too, an indictment of sorts. You got 9 transfers on the Georgia football team. How many of them are receivers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of your 9 players at receiver are transfers. That tells me you didn't do your job. You don't have the retention, or you didn't keep those young receivers in there. Now, I do know this. I know Ladd McConkey was thrilled with the coaching that he got from BMAC. And I know that Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint was too. Both of those guys are where they are and getting ready to play in the NFL because McClendon is a really, really good position coach. But the stuff you've got to do now to build relationships with players and re-recruit players, I don't know that the old school coaches want to play that game, or that they can. I don't know that they can look themselves in the mirror. I mean, this is tough. This is a new world of college football coaching. And it's going to require coaches to change and be fluid and grow with the game. I think that's Saban checked out. I mean, listen, Alabama had won a national title since 2020, and they did that in a COVID-short season where everybody had different COVID policies. You could argue, or maybe suspect that their COVID policy might have been a little more tolerant than others. The last full season national title Alabama won was 2017 on a Hail Mary. So, I mean, it's not like Alabama had been at the top of the mountain. They hadn't. Georgia won the last two SEC national titles. Maybe they could have won it last year if they played Michigan. Maybe not. I think it all would have depended on the health of Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. Point is, I think Kirby's done a really good job changing with the game. And I think these hires, James Coley and Crawford, I think these are great hires. I think this is a positive. I think attrition is a good thing. I think Coach McGee was ready to be a head coach for the last 3 or 4 years, but he needed to do it in a state where his retirement would kick in at Alabama or Georgia. So the right opportunity came, and he took it. I have no doubt he'll do well. He's hired some really good coaches in Chaney and Shear. I'm really impressed with the hires that he's made. I think Georgia State's going to be really good. And McClendon's ready to go to the NFL. McClendon, another guy ready to be a head coach, right? He's been an interim before. He's been a coordinator. Has to be hard to come back and just be a position coach. Excited for Coach McClendon. But I'm excited for Georgia because they've got coaches in these positions that are going to truly embrace their roles, and they're going to be really difficult and challenging roles. I want to take a quick break right now. I want to recognize our sponsor, Engles, everything they do for the program. We wouldn't be here each Monday night if not for Engles. I know I appreciate Engles. I know you appreciate Engles. Let's take this moment, recognize Engles, and when we come back, Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic joins us.
Did you know that Engles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Engles, low prices, love the savings.
Well, welcome back to the program. And as promised, Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic joins us. And Nick, good to see you again. Enjoyed seeing you at the Combine, a guy that I worked with at MLive there, Advanced Publications in Michigan. And now Nick with The Athletic covering the NFL and specifically an NFL draft specialist. So, Nick, let me ask you as we dig in here, overarching takeaways from this year's NFL Combine.
Man, I think the biggest one, Mike, is, I saw you the day that Caleb Williams talked, right? And he skipped the medicals, and that turned into, we saw Jaden Daniels not measure. We saw, I think, a couple of neighbors too. And, that was something I feel like we've been waiting on for a while. College kids as well as I do. You're around them a long time, and they get more and more confidence. And this is the first time in the history of the draft, the number one pick walked in the door a rich man. He's already a millionaire, right? So Caleb's approach to this whole process has been very unique, and I think guys have followed him in that some, and it trickled down. We did not see a ton of guys do all the stuff on the field, which has been, that's been dipping over the years too. But I think NIL has, if nothing else, has given these guys confidence, and I think that's interesting, if nothing else. So it's changed some things for sure.
You mentioned Ladd McConkey. It's a good place to start. How much money did he make for himself, Nick? Will he be selected in the first round? And where would you put him in that order of receivers? Because I've seen as many as 5 or 6 receivers projected in the first round.
Yeah, I think it could be up to 7. I think that's the record is 7. And, I've set it at like 5 to 7, the range in there. I don't think it'll be less than 5. It certainly could be up to 7. And Ladd, he's right. He's right in there. I don't think he's going to make it out of the 30s. You know what I'm saying? That's what I keep going for him. If he doesn't go into the bottom of the first, I think he's one of the first guys off the board, maybe even the first guy off the board. I look at Carolina there at the top of the second round and, look at all the situations they've got going on with trying to get Bryce healthy or trying to get Bryce comfortable. You got to protect him, number one, but you got to get guys out there that can run routes, be on time, and catch the ball. And I look at Ladd for a guy like Bryce Young, that would be great. I think that'd be a great fit. But, there's also teams at the bottom of the first round, Chiefs, again, need a receiver. That's a guy, and that's going to be their favorite flavor. It's going to be whatever. So you got a guy like a Donnie Mitchell or Keon Coleman, another guy that you remember from back when. Ladd's in there. Brian Thomas is in there. There's a lot of guys in that mix right there. Xavier Worthy now probably jumps up there with that 4-2-1. So I would say there's 5 to 7 that could go in that first round. I think Ladd's 6 maybe in there, maybe 5 or 6 on that list. But then there's probably 20 that are going to go by the end of Friday. So he's at the top of that one, and he's going to be playing somewhere, and I think playing a lot next year.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's an impact player. I know that at the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy compared him to Cooper Kupp, which was
that's a great, I like that.
Kind of a jaw-dropping moment. Kirk Herbstreit says he's this year's Puka, a receiver that set all these wide receiver records. So Ladd's gone from being that 165-pound 3-star that Tennessee wouldn't show up for, that Missouri stood up. Eli Drinkwitz stood him up and didn't show up at his basketball game. Even some Georgia fans said Kirby was wasting a scholarship, redshirted his entire freshman year. First game he dressed out for, didn't even get in, stood on the sidelines and froze at Missouri, and has risen up and gotten better and better and better.
4.39, Griff. 4.39.
And a great character guy, too, Nick.
How about that? Yeah. Great stuff.
Amazing. So one of the guys that didn't work out, and I think this was 100% the right call. I'll be interested to get your take on it. Brock Bowers, you just kind of your read on him and then what you think about his decision.
Yeah, I think that if he's not healthy, there's no reason, and I mean healthy. When I say healthy, I mean 100%. There's no reason for him to do anything that he doesn't want to do at all, frankly, even if he is 100%. I think Bowers is clearly the number one tight end in the country, obviously. And I think that more so what you're looking at with him is, are you rating him in that top 5 or top 10? And keeping that in mind, with all these quarterbacks and these quarterback needy teams, McCarthy and Jaden Daniels are going to get pushed up the list, so to speak, whereas Bowers is going to be above them on a lot of boards, but he's going to end up going behind them just because of the position he plays. I mean, frankly, I think that a lot of teams right now, Griff, you're going to see teams over the next, it's March 4th. The fact that he didn't work out, I think teams are going to start trying to neg him, trying to get him to go down. They're going to try and leak out, we don't really like his this or that, or we think his arm's a little short, or we think he's a little compact. I think you'll start to hear some of that, which is always the thing you hear around this time of year about guys that everybody wants. So I think that's right. What we'll hear about Brock Bowers, if nothing else. But you got to remember, this guy's tape is as good as anybody's at any position in the country, in my opinion. And this is a player that as a freshman in college was ready to go in the NFL at a position that's just not a thing. To me, Brock Bowers is the most complete tight end we have seen come through in at least a decade, right? I mean, he does everything that you want to do. He's the perfect modern tight end in that he went to a college that understands what that is and what that's going to be at the next level. They didn't limit anything about what they asked him to do. You can see there's everything you want to do with an NFL tight end in the NFL. You can go to Georgia and watch what they did with him, especially with Monk in those tiers, obviously. So I think he's going to be fine. I really don't buy a whole lot of the stuff about him sliding very far. It would be shocking to me if he's there in the teens, and someone's going to get an amazing player if he is. And I think that the one thing that it reminds me a little bit of a couple of years ago when Tyler Linderbaum came out of Iowa, and he was a center. And everyone knew Tyler Linderbaum was going to be an all-pro. He was going to be a guy that was going to be a Pro Bowler for many, many years. But, well, he's a center, so we don't want to take him. So he slides a little bit, and then, Ravens take him, and he's been an all-pro for many years. So I think that's going to be wherever Brock goes. And, Griff, I look at the Chargers there. What is that, 5? Old Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a better prospect for Jim Harbaugh to start his tenure with than Brock Bowers. I don't know if they'll do it, but that would be a perfect fit, I think, for a lot of reasons out there. I think you're absolutely right. I look at Brock Bowers and is a more explosive version of Jason Witten. I think he's a consummate pro. Yep.
And he's transformational. I don't know what to say. I've never, like I said, seen a guy that can run away and run over and run through people, and yet he doesn't look like one of the Avengers when you see him out of uniform.
Oh yeah, that's a regular guy. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's good that he didn't work out, because at the combine it feels like it's a beauty contest, for lack of a better word. And speaking of that, let's turn the page to Amarius Mims. When we talk about a beauty contest, talking about a guy that was 6'8", 340, 507, 40, fastest shuttle run by an offensive lineman in some 20 years. Nick, you've seen a lot of great linemen. What were your thoughts about Amarius when you saw him, and what do you forecast?
When I first saw him on tape like 2 years ago, I think it was a game. It was an Ohio State game, maybe a year ago, whatever it was.
Yeah,
And he's running out there on like a screen pass, and he's moving like he does downhill. And he puts his hand out and just stuffs a guy and knocks him over and tumbles him into another cup. He's a freak of an athlete. And when you see him walking around, you almost wonder how that's possible, right? He's got 11.25-inch hands, the huge long arms, everything else. But really, the thing when you watch him is that agility. He moves around, and health will be a big thing for Maris. He's got to play because he hasn't played a lot of games, obviously, at Georgia or at all. He's been hurt. But when he's up and healthy and moving around, he moves around like a big basketball player, up on his feet, up on his toes. My goodness. I mean, some of the stuff he does out in space, I think he could be a left or right tackle if you get him to the right team. And I was curious on him coming. I mean, he had such a good combine. I don't think he's going to last very long. I wondered if maybe he could slip to one of those teams in the 20s with some really good line coaches. I doubt it now, but ultimately you'd like to see him go somewhere that has a good line coach that understands the position, and then will continue to develop because he needs to keep working. That's for sure. I mean, he's a wonderful athlete. We know that, but he's got a long way to go to be where he's going to be as a player.
Nick, who are some of those teams? Who would you like to see him with when you talk about teams with good line coaches?
I think Philadelphia is number one that comes off the list with everyone's. Jeff Stoutland's been the best forever. He was actually there. He's always a guy at the combine that works with him on a lot of the on-field drills. He's one. I think it's a good year for tackles. A lot of teams need him. Dallas, of course, needs one. I looked at Dallas for him earlier on, but again, I think they're like 25, and it's like, man, I don't think he's going to make it, that far. But again, there's some other teams in there that have got newer staffs that you never know what happens. New Orleans, is in there, needs a tackle. So we'll see. Everybody really, to a degree, needs one in some areas. So see where it goes.
Kamari Lassiter is a guy that at times we've heard projected in the first round. He's a cornerback. I think he went 6'1", 180. I know that. I think I'd heard there was some questions about his physicality. I mean, certainly at the college level, Nick, he can come up and tackle, but the NFL is a different game. Now, Kamari didn't run the 40, but he ran the best three-cone drill there. So for starters, tell us the importance of the three-cone drill, and then secondly, I guess just your thoughts on Kamari Lassiter.
Yeah, the three-cone is your one that nobody wants to run anymore. That's the agility test, and it's one of the most important, really important for defenders, for edge players and corners as well. It's how fast can you cover a short area quickness? How much can you sort of defend against wiggle? All that sort of stuff. And Lassiter is a guy that he's got really good size for a corner, and compared with his speed and agility, he can move around. He's sticky, but the thing with him is, and you mentioned he comes up and hits, not always as much as maybe you would want. I think that he's also a young guy that, Georgia's got a couple of those guys in this class that are very, very talented that have played some in big moments, but haven't played a ton. You know what I'm saying? So he's one that, there are times he'll get lost and there are times he looks great. And there are times where he'll play a press thing all the way out and it looks perfect and he'll run the route for the guy. Sort of like, I'm blanking on the name, the dude who went to the Eagles last year.
Keely Ringo.
Yes, a lot like Keely, in that there are times when it comes together, whoa, like he blends the physicality with the quickness and it's perfect. And then there are times like Keely, he'll get lost and it won't be exactly what you want. But those are not problems that you can't coach your way around. So Lassiter, yeah, I mean, he's a guy that probably has first-round talent to a degree in some of those areas, especially with the agility. But probably mentally still needs some time to grow. And I think that that means second round probably for him. But like the tackles and the corners or the receivers, this corner class is actually pretty good too. So a lot of guys there on day two.
Georgia had a couple safeties that really, I don't know if they were locks for second day guys. Javon Bullard's a guy pretty well known for his hit on Marvin Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I didn't think either one of these players, Nick, were going to run sub 4.5. Tyke Smith led the team in tackles, led the team in picks, but he's a little smaller. He's 5'10", and size matters in the NFL. They like those DBs to be 6 foot or taller. Bullard a little smaller. A lot of people didn't think he would run these numbers. What does it mean that these Georgia safeties, DBs, ran 4.46 and 4.47 respectively?
Yeah, they're good players. I think that's what it means. Number one, it means that what you saw on tape, regardless of the size, and it's been this way before at Georgia. Chris Smith was another one that I like a lot. He's 5'10", something like that. He was small, and he didn't run that well. And he was another one that I think fell because he didn't run that well. But a lot of these Georgia guys, they're not in the wrong position and they hit. They're always in the right position and they hit. And if you can get more explosion and burst out of them, then all the better. Tyke Smith, I really like him. He's a guy that came on, I feel like this year was his big year, right? It was really his only year as a showcase. And he was one that beginning of the season, I didn't know much about him at all. But by the end of the year, he had grown on me quite a bit, almost all the way up there with, I think of him almost even, both those guys now to a degree. I mean, Smith had a great combine. He had great jumps as well.
Yeah.
And really those two guys are the ones, I think they're both day two guys because at the end of the day, they both tackle and they do it consistently. And more than that, it's when we say that you got to tackle. Okay, well, what's that mean? Like that means, okay, I'm willing to come up there and sacrifice my body and get in the way. That's part of it. The other part of it is, do you know what you're doing? And do you know where you're supposed to go? Do you know how to fit a run? Smith and Bullard are both guys who you can trust them to do that. I feel like Smith, especially as a guy, you can move him around some. I feel like you could, I think Georgia did that last year. You can put him in the slot. You can move him around. Those 40 times are good. The split's good. He can cover a tight end and maybe your slot guy and help defend the run. I think Bullard maybe could do the same thing. So good stuff there for both those guys.
Yeah, they were coached up by Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp, and a lot of really future good NFL guys or current NFL guys came out of Muschamp or Kirby. Nick, I know not all the Georgia guys are marquee. I guess I'd ask you, guys like Kendall Milton or Marcus Rosemy, Saint, Cedric Van Pran, any of those names jump out at you, impress you?
Van Pran is definitely one that I think has been underrated in this whole process. The centers have not gotten nearly as much attention, and maybe they will after the combine, as they should have. And I think that he's one who wasn't going to do anything at the combine that was going to surprise anybody or whatever, because he's a big lineman and it's some decent times in there. It's fine. The shuttles are good and everything else. But when you watch him on tape, man, he is a really, really smart, tough mauler who finishes up there. And this is a year where I think a lot of centers are going to go in the top 100. I think he's one of them. I think he's a guy that could go before Saturday. We'll see where he falls sort of in the stack and how many teams pull the trigger there. But there's 5, maybe 6 guys right now in this class that are guys who could push for a starting job next year. And I think he's one of them. Really, really good athlete. I think last year, a lot of teams would have died for a guy like that. There was a lot of center needy teams last year that were not finding what they quite wanted. But Cedric's a really good one. The Georgia offensive line this year was really interesting. They had to move some things around, but I think they ended up Fairchild is another really, really good player who ended up going back, right? He's still there. Mm-hmm. They always have good linemen. We know that because they're athletes and they put them in the right spots. And I think Cedric, natural center, probably not going to be a guard, but I think he'll be good to go.
When we look ahead to next year and Carson Beck is on the clock, he was potentially going to go this year. He negotiated a deal, or his camp did. Mm-hmm. I like when these guys go, "Oh, I didn't know anything about this." You didn't. There are people that are getting paid to do this for you. Of course,
for your 7 figures.
They don't want to talk. I get it. They don't want to talk about it. They know the boosters don't like it. They know that it hurts the donation model, which made it all the more mind-blowing that Carson would take a picture of himself with a Lamborghini. Like, what are you doing, man? You're not helping yourself out. Your thoughts, though, on Carson, the football player, Nick, from what you've seen?
Man, he got so much better as the year went on, to a point where I really do think that if he'd come out, Griff, I think he would have been a first-round pick. I think he would have been ahead of Bo Nix, and I think he would have been right in that conversation with McCarthy. When the year ended, I think a lot of teams had him ahead of McCarthy in terms of he's a guy who, when we talk about, are you comfortable between the numbers? He is. As a young player, has no problem driving that ball down the middle of the field, has no problem attacking with some of those more difficult throws. Played in an offense that utilizes a tight end, is going to put people in position to where you're going to have to go win and be accurate with the ball. And I think the best part about his game is sort of twofold. He's a really accurate passer. I mean, really, really accurate for his age. And I like his feet. I mean, he's really quick in the pocket. I think he gets out of the way. He did a really good job last year of extending a lot of stuff and, just getting the ball out and making sure the offense was sort of on time. I wondered how much they trusted him at the beginning of the year, certainly at the end. But I wondered almost like, I'm curious now, next year going forward, I would imagine that'll be quite a bit more. I wondered at the beginning of the year, I'm sure it wasn't that high, but, he just kept passing every test and got better and better and better. I think he could have a huge year. You could have a Heisman level type year if all the things, sort of around him click. That's how it goes for quarterbacks, right? You got to have help to do what you're supposed to do, but he's got all the talent. He's got all the talent to do what he would need there for that.
Yeah, I think those are good observations. I think early on, I think Carson was kind of taking the easy money down low, and then as the year went on, he was trying to stretch it out. Yeah, I think he was a little bit hampered. Brock Bowers went down with that injury midseason. Ladd McConkey missed the first 4 games of the year. It might have been different if Ladd was out there from the jump. I mean, such an explosive player. But to your point, I think a lot of what Carson does is going to come down to the players around him, and they're pretty heavy in the transfers at receiver. That's a position at Georgia. I'm not sure, if I sat right here and asked you, which Georgia receiver you'd draft first, that any would jump to mind. A guy that I will ask about next year is a safety named Malachi Starks. Mm-hmm. And when you were watching some of these other guys, Malachi was a guy that came in here as a 5-star. A lot of people here think he's the most athletic player on defense. How high can a safety go? Because this guy looks to be about as good a safety as anybody in the country that I've seen. I don't know. You may have a better read on that spot.
I think it's a new conversation, and I think it's something where, a couple of years ago when Kyle Hamilton went out, we had this conversation with a lot of people. And Hamilton, a lot of teams were like talking about, yeah, I'll do it. I'll take him in the top 10. I'm not afraid. And they didn't. He fell. And, of course, he's been terrific. He's been an all-pro player, and maybe would have been worth it at that point. I think that, Starks is a guy that's sort of in that mold. He's a big, big guy who can move, and he's long, and he'll hit, and he'll do all the things. Caleb Downs is another one that comes to mind in that.
Yeah.
And I think that space is growing in the area that like a tight end is also growing, because what we've seen is the death of the linebacker, right? We don't have the big 250-pound. Those don't exist anymore. A lot of teams live in nickel and dime these days. So if you can get safeties who can move around the field, play different spots, and do different things, like, if you redrafted last year's draft, Brian Branch would go a lot higher than he did. And I think that those, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just about a matter of getting the right team to understand, this is a really good football player that if we put in the front 7, he's going to make some impacts, but he can also, we don't ever have to take him off the field. He can be in the back covering. He can be up front. He can, help us set the table in the back end and be a captain back there. They're incredibly important. And I really don't understand why, frankly, that market has not sort of upped itself, because I can understand not wanting to draft a running back that high. I can understand, not wanting to invest in a tight end because we're not all the way sure yet on, is he going to fit the offense I want to run? But a safety who hits and is smart and does what you need, you're not going anywhere as a football team in any league if you don't have one. So a really good one, I still think can go, toward the top 15. I don't think that's out of the realm. But I think you've got some guys, Starks, Downs coming up that, depending on how they're used in college, that math and that conversation could change.
Talking with Nick Baumgardner of The Athletic. Nick, I want to wrap it up asking you, kind of circling back on Georgia again. We've seen the Philadelphia Eagles go hog wild drafting Georgia players. Again, you covered Michigan for several years. How much does the brand matter when you come right down to it? I know they break these players down individually in the NFL draft process, whether it's the Senior Bowl or the Combine. These guys are evaluated on an individual basis. How much do you think the team brand matters in the NFL when they're selecting players?
Oh, it matters. It matters, especially if they won. And I think that's the brand. Did you win? Because at some point in the draft, you get to pick one, 207, and it's the 6th round or the 7th round, and it's the end of the thing. And it's like, okay, we've got 3 guys that we're looking at. One went to some school I've never heard of. One went to a school that lost all the time. And one went to Georgia. They're probably picking the guy that went to Georgia because he's been to a program that's serious and understands it. And there's like an expectation when you draft a guy like a Michigan's had that under Harbaugh for a long time. The guys that Michigan would put in the league weren't necessarily guys that were going to be a star on your team, but they were guys that were going to make your roster and fill a hole and do everything on special teams and tackle and hit and be annoying in training camp for the veterans and all that sort of thing. That's the Georgia guys are that with more talent. Quite frankly, they've had better players in recent years, but I do think it absolutely matters, especially late in the draft when you're stacking guys and it's, man, this looks awfully close, but what's his history say? Well, his history says is he survived and thrived in a super competitive environment. That is the thing that I think the college kids often don't understand coming out, high school kids, I should say, is when you go to, and this is, Griff, I wrote that book on the 1997 Michigan team, which meant studying with Mark Snyder, which meant studying all the stuff in the 90s, how recruiting worked and how college football worked. And you remember this really well. Everybody was so competitive because the rosters could be bigger. You could take more guys. And, man, I mean, if you went to a place, it was like there were 6 guys in front of you to get anywhere you wanted to go. And there's still something to be said about I went to Georgia or Bama or Michigan or Ohio State, and I made it out of the big, deep stack, and I'm here. And that absolutely matters. And just because you didn't get as many touches or whatever it might be, I mean, teams will find you and they'll overlook it because you played them around talent. And there's not lies told about some of those practices are harder than some of the games. You know what I mean? And that's a thing. So I think that the brand definitely matters, especially if you're winning for sure.
Yeah, I think Kirby Smart's already working on sending you a thank you note there, Nick. He'll probably clip that out for his players. He always talks and says, "Hey, look, these GMs are never asking me how much did this guy play his freshman year," and the fact that you do play against other elite competition in practice, and as you said, just as with Jim Harbaugh, you learn how to play special teams, you learn how to survive the grind, you understand that it's a business. As opposed to maybe some of the guys that go to smaller programs and don't have to work as hard to get on the field or to stay on the field.
Or to stay on the field, most important. And that's the thing. Can you stay there? I want guys that can find a way on and keep me from having to play it off. And I think that when you play at a place like a Georgia, that's usually translates.
Yeah, no doubt. Nick will be staying in the sports writer business as long as he wants. He's a future Hall of Famer and a really good writer. Appreciate everything that you've shared with us today. Nick, tell people where they can find you. In addition to buying an athletic subscription, how can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm at Nick Baumgardner on Twitter, at Nick Baumgardner FB on Instagram and Threads now as well. And then, at The Athletic or sometimes in the New York Times, Griff. How about that? They let us bums into the New York Times. How about that? That's quite a feat.
I love your Instagram. Nick does these little videos, and I love those videos on Instagram. Yeah, that's new media stuff. That's pretty well received.
That's been fun. That's been fun to play with for the last year or so. So more to come in that space, I guess. We'll see.
Yeah, you're on the cutting edge. Nick Baumgardner, thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
All right, Griff.
You got it. Coming up next, it's going to be the Who's Hot, Who's Not, sponsored by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. We'll be right back after this.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new trained HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
And welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here, back for the final segment. Freelance a little bit. Last Monday night, I was down in Gainesville to present the Steve Spurrier Award, and I had a chance to talk with Coach Spurrier and Chris Doring. And, I knew that not everybody was sky high on Billy Napier and the Florida Gators, but I was a little surprised to see some of the comments. Surprised and then not surprised that Coach Spurrier was quoted as saying to the Jacksonville Reporter, said, "There's a feeling around the Gators of what the heck are we doing? A lot of questions that I don't have the answers to about the organization." Spurrier said, "Just because you hire the most people doesn't mean you're going to win. All these extra people, I question how much that really helps. Billy's a good guy who works his tail off. I like Billy, good family man, but we do wish the organization was a little more tidy." Well, you could probably guess that's not hot. That is a cold comment from Coach Spurrier on Napier. There's a lot of frustration in Gainesville. Florida does have a relatively light first half of the schedule. The path for Billy Napier to keep his job is for Florida to gain some momentum early on, win 4 out of the first 5, go 500 from there, maybe get a win over a Tennessee or an upset over maybe one of the big name teams on their schedule, Florida State, Georgia. Can't really see that happening. But then again, when I was down there, I had somebody tell me that they thought that Florida, Pat Dooley, retired columnist from the Gainesville Sun, told me Florida had as much talent as they've had since Dan Mullen's final year. And of course, 2020 was the last year that Georgia lost a regular season game. And that was to the Florida Gators and Dan Mullen. So I don't think that Florida has the talent to beat Georgia. I think Billy Napier is, if I had to bet on it, I would say he's probably not going to be the head coach at the start of the 2025 season. But those comments from Steve Spurrier were very telling to me, because Coach Spurrier, really doesn't often talk out of turn. I think if he's saying it, I think this is probably a pretty prevalent thought behind the scenes. I saw where Alabama finally finished completing their staff, Coach Kalen DeBoer. And I've had a lot of people that, when I talk about Alabama football, they say, well, why are you talking about, why are you talking? Well, why I'm talking about it is because they're the defending SEC champions. Why I'm talking about it is because this is a program that's gotten in Kirby Smart's way 5 out of 6 times. And why I'm talking about it is because, the most successful coach of our generation is just retired, and there's a huge transition going on. And Alabama took a chance hiring a guy with no SEC experience in Kalen DeBoer, who I think has a very limited resume when you get right down to it, in the sense of he's coached 3 years of Power 5 football. And all 3 years, he had Michael Penix as his quarterback. How much of it was Penix and how much of it was DeBoer? And granted, you got to be able to build a team and you got to do the X's and the O's. But as our guest, Nick Baumgardner, just pointed out, there's so much more to it than scheming. And I almost feel like DeBoer's in over his head. Now, that's not to say that Alabama can't win 10 or 11 games, but if they don't win 12 or 13 and not only get in the playoff, but win a playoff game, I think this season's a failure. If you ask me what Alabama has to do to say the Kalen DeBoer hire was a good hire, I would tell you they need to win a game in the playoffs, at least one game. Because, again, Nick Saban hasn't won a title since 2020. Georgia's won the last 2 national titles representing the SEC. It's been a minute since Alabama's really been on top. And you could split hairs about the COVID season and everybody having different policies. You could even split hairs about 2017 and whether they even belonged in the playoff, considering they didn't even play in their league championship game. So it's been a minute. When I think about dominant Alabama, I think about when Kirby Smart was there and when they won back-to-back. Bama never won back-to-back during the college football playoffs, not in the 4-team era. Georgia did. So I do think you got to give DeBoer a little bit of time, but at the same time, I think you've got to have some immediate success or you don't get that time because a lot of those players are going to transfer out. And I think there's going to be some players that transfer out even after spring drills. That's why you're seeing Nick Saban sitting in Alabama basketball games. That's why you're seeing their quarterback sitting at the Alabama basketball game with Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer and athletic director Greg Byrne. Folks, I got to tell you, that is desperation to say, look, everything's fine. Everything's wonderful. The fact that you had to go to that extent, Jalen Milroe, let's be honest here. Let's just be completely transparent. Was Jalen Milroe paid to go to that game? Does Jalen Milroe really want to be in an Alabama basketball game on a Saturday night sitting with his – I'm not to say that he doesn't like Nick Saban or Kalen DeBoer, but let's be real here. There was a reason for that. Reese Davis is there, Kalen DeBoer. Let's all play nice and put everybody on camera and show you that Alabama is one big happy family and there's nothing wrong here. The fact that they went to the extent to put that facade on television tells me, right, that things aren't good, that you had to go to that extreme. Now, Alabama people say, oh, you're crazy. You hate Alabama. Now, listen, I'm not crazy. I don't hate Alabama. I covered Alabama in the 90s. I was born in Alabama. I have great respect for that program. Like I respect Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. It's all this. I cover the SEC. I've covered the Big Ten. I like all of college football. But sometimes you got to call it like it is. And Alabama's in this huge transition, and it looks like they're in quicksand a little bit. It took forever to fill out the staff. He wasn't able to keep key assistants from the Washington staff. His offensive coordinator and offensive line coach left and went to the Seattle Seahawks. His veteran defensive coordinator went to Tennessee to coach. People are jumping off. He lost Caleb Downs, their best defensive player. They lost Isaiah Bond, their best receiver, and there's still spring football ahead. So what's going to happen after the spring football session? Do we know how Jalen Milroe fits with Kalen DeBoer? Do we know it's going to work? You look at the schedule, there's tests, and there's reason to wonder, and there's reason to ask questions. And it's going to be an offseason filled with questions for Kalen DeBoer. And the picture of him and Nick Saban and the athletic director and Reese Davis and Jalen Milroe, I'm going to give that's a loss. That's an L for me. That's trying too hard. You're trying too hard. That's cold. That's on the colds. That's not hot. That's not good. That's bad. I thought that was way over the top and way too obvious, and it just screams insecurity to me. So that said, where do we go with the hot then? How about the Georgia baseball team coming from behind to beat Georgia Tech? What were they down 9-3? I think they came all the way back and got a win. I didn't see that coming. Pretty amazing for the Bulldogs to get that win. You know, they had that game, was it Friday night, where they're leading and it looks like they're going to get it in. And then the umpires call the game up, gets canceled. Kind of took a win away from Georgia baseball. They persevered. I saw Charlie Condon was named the National Player of the Month by one of these. Listen, this guy is worth the price of admission. This guy is really special. He might be the best right-handed hitter in college baseball right now, playing at Foley Field. They don't really play anybody of note this week. I think they play some Northern Colorado. I didn't even know Northern Colorado had a university, much less a baseball team. But they'll be coming to Athens, and Georgia will be able to beat up on them a little bit. We really won't know a whole lot about Georgia baseball until the SEC season gets here. And the SEC is just so brutal. It is so brutal in baseball, so doggone good. You could be the 15th best team in the country and only be the 9th best team in the SEC. That's how good it is. But a lot of confidence, a lot of resolve being shown by the Georgia Bulldogs coming from behind, trailing 9-3, come back and get that win 11-9. That's scorching hot. Going back to the combine, you know, Ladd McConkey, just can't say enough about him, his family, what they mean to Georgia. You know, when I think about, you know, if you could put a poster up of what you want Georgia people to see with Georgia, you put up Ladd McConkey in the sense of, you know, here is a guy from in-state that's grown into this great football player, came in as a 3-star, trusted the process, redshirted, worked hard, never complained, played special teams, did everything the coaches asked of him, and just kept getting better and better and better. And then off the field, he's the Werfel Award winner for his community service. You know, it would have been nice to see Ladd come back for another year and maybe win a Heisman Trophy. But when you look at what he's doing right now, running a 4.39 40 and a 36 vertical, just so explosive, catching the ball so well, he made the right decision. And Ladd knew best. And I'm happy for him and happy for his family, because I know they love Georgia. And there was a thought, man, if he came back, but Ladd made the right call. And clearly he's backing it up. I can't wait to see what he does in the NFL. I think the same about Kendall Milton. You know, Kendall has had so many injuries over the course of his career, whether it was the hamstring or the sprained MCL. Last year he was running with that knee brace on. Really wish he would have taken it off, but he wasn't ready yet. He wasn't comfortable. Took the knee brace off the combine, and man, did he look good. Wow, he looked fluid. 6'2", 225, 4'6", 240. Not as bad as you think when you look at the split, the 10-yard split. I think he was at 151 in the first 10 yards. That's a more important measurement. His burst, how quickly he hits the line, how explosive he'll be at 225. Now, the running back position has been somewhat devalued over the years. So I don't think we're talking about Kendall being a first-round guy, or probably not even a second or third second-day guy. But I do think he'll get drafted. And I do think with his attitude and his upside, his ceiling, I think he makes a roster. So I was happy to see him work out. He put up really good numbers. He was explosive, had a good vertical, had a good broad jump, worked out well, interviewed well. Again, I know the running back position has been somewhat devalued, but when you look at this guy and you sit down and you talk with him, you know, I don't know how a team wouldn't want to take him. You know, everybody's going to kind of have him circled and say, if we get a chance, let's get this guy. This is a guy we want to put into the mix. I thought Brock Bowers, even though his interview was somewhat vanilla, that's who Brock is. And to me, it would have been bad if he would have went there and tried to be somebody that he's not. If he suddenly would have tried to be a chatterbox, or talk global warming, or try to come up with some red hot quote, it would have looked odd. It'd look weird. And I'm glad that he was true to himself. He is true to himself. He is who he is. I've joked with his mom that if I was going to market Brock Bowers the first thing I would do would be find a shoe company that could make a solid leather cleat, either solid black or solid brown. Like they used to wear in those black and white grainy footage films, those high tops. I need to see that. I need to see Brock Bowers wearing that high top black leather shoe, solid black. For the poster, I'm putting him in a leather helmet, and I'm calling him the natural, right? I'm going to play up to the humbleness. I'm going to say, look, he's not flashy. He's not wearing the neon cleats. He's not. There's nothing flashy about what he's wearing around his neck, around his fingers. He'll put his national championship rings away and share them with his grandkids one day, probably 60 years from now, knowing him. He's such a humble guy. But he's just a hardworking guy. He's going to show up and he's going to go to work. He's not going to say a whole lot about it. Okay. He's just not. He's not going to talk about himself. He's not going to talk about any sort of political issues or any other, he's going to know the offense better than anybody. He's going to pick it up fast. He's going to stay way clean, out of trouble. This is a guy that's, he's a throwback. I don't know any other way to say it. He's the natural. And I'm excited to see him play. And I think Georgia, this is a guy that if I were Josh Brooks, and Josh probably rolls his eyes every time I say that, because Josh is so qualified. He's such an incredible football mind in addition to AD. But I'm getting that statue of Brock Bowers up right away. I'm saying, look, claim him now. Put the statue up of the natural right next to Jordan Davis, right? Those are the two, 99 and 19. These are the guys that embody what Georgia's all about, right? They just took care of business and did amazing things. They were game changers, right? You've heard me say this before. If Jordan Davis doesn't come back for senior year, they don't win the 2021 title. And he was the buffer between Kirby and the team, right? And then if Bowers doesn't do what he does, the whole offense revolved around him. I was talking to a DB from TCU at the Combine, and he's like, man, he says Bowers is going to have a Travis Kelce impact on the NFL. No sour grapes. They were blown away by the guy. I mentioned earlier, I talked with the Florida State players there, some of the Florida State players. And Jared Verse, one of the guys that's projected to go in the first round, said that he wishes he could go back and do things different. That wasn't his exact quote, to be clear. The story's up, but he made it pretty clear that he regretted not playing. And I thought that was a real sign of humility, and I felt that was very heartfelt. And really, all the Florida State guys I talked to that did not play, you could tell it hurt. And when it really hurt was when I saw him on the airport leaving town, and I genuinely felt bad for these guys because they got their Florida State bag tags on, and this should be a celebrated team that went 13-0 and won the ACC. Should be a celebrated team. But what's going to be remembered is 63-3 by the nation. Now the Florida State fans tell, oh, we don't remember that. We just, okay, well, that's fine. That's you. The whole country was watching the Orange Bowl, and Florida State had a chance to compete against a team that had won 2 national titles. And maybe they wouldn't have beaten Georgia. I don't think they would have, but they would have fought. And it certainly would have been more competitive than 63-3. I think Zion Logue predicted 38-17 because a lot of Florida State guys were, there was more of them than him at the Shrine Bowl. And they were saying, SEC ain't nothing, blah, blah, blah. I think their tone's changed now. And I think they've been humbled. And those guys have to live with 63-3. And that's another, that's not a hot take. That's cold. That's tough. That's sad. But it is what it is. And now finishing on a hot note, Georgia spring football a week away. Next Monday night, the program will be almost entirely geared towards spring football, digging into some deep issues, troubleshooting, who to be excited about, newcomers, all that good stuff. I think this program is in a good place. And I think that Carson Beck is in a good place. And I didn't fully understand and appreciate what goes on in that locker room until I heard Tate Ratledge talk about, the kind of grief they give Carson Beck for not scrambling effectively, or talk about how the guys cut up and have fun, and how that locker room stays balanced out. And hearing ETN say, that when he came in, he could tell right away how much his team loved each other. I mean, that testimony says everything. And believe me, the people in Florida heard it too. That if there was an indictment on Billy Napier, it was ETN, 1, leaving, and then 2, saying, look, we didn't have a locker room like this. And then everybody says, okay, we got a culture issue, right? It's the head coach that sets the tone. Conversely, the fact that Georgia keeps this positive tone with Kirby Smart, I think this is big. I think it's been a really strong offseason for the Bulldogs. Can't wait for them to start next week. Pro Day is also next week. We'll see some of these guys do some workouts. Until then, you get to watch Brandon Adams every day on DawgNation Daily at 10 a.m. You know that Kaylee and Connor have a show on Thursday nights now. They do a great job. It's always a lot of fun to watch. Wednesday night, it's Jeff Centel with Before the Hedges, and he tells you about tomorrow's stars. And then you got to check out our YouTube channel, man. We have got so many videos up on YouTube, all this free content. All the players, podium interviews. Dejon Edwards stood up there and talked for 15 minutes. Really good interview. Guys that you just, Tyke Smith, you hear them speak in a way, they didn't talk like that at Georgia. They were much, much more careful about what they said. At the Combine, you really feel like you get to know the guy in that podium interview. I thought it was really refreshing. Always enjoy the Combine podium interviews. I think you will too if you go to our DawgNation YouTube channel and check that out. I want to thank my producer, Kaylee Manziel. I want to thank my guest, Nick Baumgardner, for coming on. I want to thank you for watching. If you got any questions or comments, drop them down in the comments section. Hit me up on Twitter at Mike Griffith 32 or email me at Mike Griffith 32, Mike Griffith 032 at gmail.com. Everybody, have a great week.